don't castrate a man for his wallet. You do it to send a message. On October 16th, Julian Thorne was found stuffed in the trunk of his Aston Martin, surgically mutilated with clinical precision. The killer didn't leave a single trace of evidence, except for a receipt shoved into the victim's mouth. This wasn't a murder. It was a liquidation. Julian Thorne, the self-proclaimed Titan of Wall Street, lay in the trunk of his Aston Martin. He was naked, curled in the fetal position, and surgically castrated. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses, just the handwritten note in his mouth, written in elegant, flowing calligraphy. The debt is paid. Police initially called it a robbery, but you don't castrate a man for his wallet. This wasn't a theft. It was a liquidation. To understand the brutality of the murder, we have to track the velocity of the fall. The clock starts ticking on October 8th at 10:14 a.m. The execution begins. It doesn't start with a gun. It starts with Sarah Jenkins. She isn't just a quantitative analyst. She was Julian's office wife for 3 years, the woman who managed his schedule by day and his ego by night. She stands on her desk. She screams the accusation across the open-plan floor. She doesn't use euphemisms. She explicitly states that Julian Thorne is HIV positive and has knowingly infected her. The silence that follows is heavier than the noise that preceded it. Julian doesn't look up. He knows looking up is an admission. At 10:45 a.m., Julian is liquidated. Marcus Vane, the CEO, watches from his glass office above. He doesn't speak. He makes a single hand signal. Security escorts Julian to the elevator. By the time he hits the pavement, he is a ghost. By 1:30 p.m., Julian is at a private clinic on the Upper East Side. The room smells of antiseptic and old magazines. The fluorescent lights hum with a low, sickening buzz that seems to drill into his temples. He demands a rapid test, his voice cracking, praying Sarah is just a scorned lover trying to torch his reputation. But when the doctor returns, the silence in the room changes. It becomes thick, suffocating. The diagnosis is confirmed. The virus is real. And in that cold, sterile room, the math changes violently. Julian realizes the scope of the contamination. He hasn't just infected Sarah. He has exposed Elena Vane. And Elena isn't just a mistress. She is the wife of Marcus Vane, the man who just fired him. The man who treats betrayal like a cancerous cell. Julian's hands begin to shake, not from the diagnosis, but from the realization that he has stolen from the most dangerous man on Wall Street. The calculation shifts from scandal to survival. 6 p.m. Paranoia sets in. Julian returns to his apartment, but he doesn't turn on the lights. He moves through the penthouse in the blue glow of the city outside, every shadow looking like a hitman. He knows Marcus Vane's reputation. Vane doesn't sue people. He erases them. The silence of the apartment is deafening. Julian begins liquidating his physical assets. The sound of zippers on a duffel bag. The heavy thud of gold watches being tossed inside. He grabs his secondary passport, a document he bought years ago for contingencies. He books a flight to Zurich for the next morning. He can feel the walls closing in. He is sweating, despite the chill of the air conditioning. 11:42 p.m. The fatal error. Julian is packed. He is ready to run. Then the phone buzzes on the marble countertop. The vibration sounds like a gunshot in the quiet room. It's Elena. The message is simple. Meet me at the Pierre. Suite 404. A rational man would have kept running. But Julian is an arrogant man. He convinces himself that Elena is a co-conspirator, not a victim. He imagines her scared, waiting for him in a silk robe, needing him to save her. He cancels the taxi to JFK. He gets into his Aston Martin. The engine roars to life, the last sound of power he will ever hear. 12:15 a.m., October 9th. Julian enters the Pierre Hotel. The lobby smells of lilies and old money. He walks past the concierge, takes the elevator to the 4th floor. The hallway is dead silent, lined with thick carpets that swallow his footsteps. He knocks on the door of Suite 404. He steps inside. For the next 7 days, Julian Thorne is off the grid. But he isn't dead. Not yet. Based on what forensics would later find, we can reconstruct the nightmare of that week. While guests in the hallway ordered room service and complained about the Wi-Fi, Julian was likely strapped to a table just feet away. The autopsy would later reveal he was kept hydrated and conscious. There was no chaotic struggle, no screaming that alerted the neighbors. It was a quiet, controlled dismantling. Whoever held him there didn't want him to die. They wanted him to feel the liquidation. The smell of cauterized flesh likely hung in the air, masked by the hotel's floral air fresheners. It was a slow, surgical erasure of a human being. 4 a.m., October 16th. The transaction closes. Security guard Miguel Santos finds the Aston Martin in the Obsidian Capital garage. The air is damp, smelling of oil and rain. Police arrive, expecting a carjacking. But the moment they shine their flashlights into the trunk, the robbery theory dissolves. Robbers don't leave receipts. And the body has been surgically castrated. No jagged cuts, no rage, just cold clinical precision. The investigation immediately pivoted to the most obvious suspect, Marcus Vane. The timeline was damning. Vane fired Julian on the 8th. Julian vanished the same night. Detectives were convinced they would find a jealous husband with a shaky alibi, but it was a red herring. Flight manifests confirmed Marcus Vane was on a Gulfstream jet to London 24 hours before Julian even entered the Pierre Hotel. He had an ironclad alibi. He wasn't the killer, but the police were looking at the wrong side of the marriage. Simultaneously, the digital forensics unit was reconstructing Julian's final movements using cell tower triangulation. The data was unequivocal. At 12:15 a.m. on October 9th, his signal locked onto a tower directly above the Pierre Hotel. It remained there for 3 hours before vanishing. When police cross-referenced the hotel's guest list for that night, one name stood out like a flare in the dark. Vane. Not Marcus, but Elena. The realization didn't come with a siren. It came with a terrifying clarity. Marcus Vane was in London, but his wife, Elena, had checked into Suite 404 of the Pierre under her maiden name 2 hours before Julian arrived. The pieces snapped into place. The surgical precision wasn't the work of a hired thug. It was the work of a woman who treated the affair not as a romance, but as a contagion she needed to excise. Detective Holloway made one final play. He brought Elena Vane in. She sat in the interrogation room, not with a lawyer, but alone. She wore a white dress, immaculate, contrasting with the grime of the precinct. The room smelled of stale coffee and nervous sweat, but Elena smelled of expensive perfume and ice. Holloway slid the crime scene photos across the metal table. The blood, the note, the mutilation. "He suffered, Mrs. Vane," Holloway said, leaning in. "That wasn't a quick death. That was a week of torture. You're a philanthropist. You sit on hospital boards. Does this look like justice to you?" Elena didn't look at the photos. She looked at Holloway. She didn't blink. The hum of the interrogation room lights seemed to get louder. "Detective," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "In my husband's world, when an asset becomes toxic, you don't just sell it. You write it down to zero. You ensure it can never infect the portfolio again." She stood up, smoothing her dress. "Mr. Thorne was a bad investment. I simply corrected the market." She walked out of the precinct 20 minutes later. Holloway watched her go, knowing he had his confession, and knowing he couldn't use a single word of it. If this were a movie, the credits would roll over a courtroom scene. There would be a gavel, a verdict, and a tearful confession. But on Wall Street, justice is a commodity, and if you have enough capital, you can short it. The district attorney refused to press charges against Elena Vane. The security footage corrupted, the evidence evaporated, and the case of Julian Thorne didn't end with a bang. It ended with a signature on a dismissal form. Today, Julian's office has been repainted. His clients were reassigned before his body had even thawed. He was a man who believed he was the main character of the universe. In the end, he was just a vacancy to be filled. As for Elena Vane, she is still a fixture of high society. You can see her in the society pages, smiling at charity galas, raising money for medical research. To the public, she is a grieving friend. But to the detectives who saw what she did to Julian Thorne, she is something else entirely. She is a woman who balanced the books with a scalpel and walked away with profit. Until the next case is cracked open, this is True Crime Chronicles. Hit subscribe, ring the bell. The next file drops soon.